Okay, hi guys. So if you were tuning in to the YouTube live, there were so many awesome questions that we didn't even get to tackle. So we decided to film a separate video that we'll upload to YouTube right after so that we could tackle some of the great questions and comments and engagement that you guys had for us. Hopefully you guys get to see this. So first thing first, I wanted to give a shout out to Naga Monster. If I spell your name wrong, don't worry. By the time you guys view this, we'll have a screenshot up of the comment. But Naga Monster said, so excited and pleased you're doing this UX plus robotics webinar. I've been wanting this topic to come up to the forefront for 4 to 5 years now. Thank you! Exclamation, exclamation, exclamation. And please do more of these. Hashtag brain for robots. And then Naga Monster also said, right on, humans adapt, tweeted your webinar. And then Naga Monster, you are MVP, by the way.
Yeah.
Yes, yes,
Look
yes.
at that.
Human involved. Okay, Naga Monster, thank you so much. And also to a bunch of you that were very excited about this webinar. When we first heard about this topic to do this webinar, we were so excited because there's a lot of UX and engineering conversations that never get to the forefront. You don't see that in the final product.
Yeah, no, it's a great topic, and I think a lot of it is overlooked by the software engineering aspect and folks. So it's good to show how important it really is and how much interaction between engineering and UX is critical to the success of a product.
And I think people don't realize how much engineering plays in conversations of UX and how much engineering cares about it and how much of engineering is driven by UX. And it's not a single silo designer's position, but it's really a collective effort of everybody working on the product. Let's tackle the next person. Thank you again, Naga Monster. Kelsey, the concept of robots doing the repetitive or monotonous tasks reminds me of loops in coding or user-made methods. Just kind of neat way to think about it.
Yeah.
We were talking about this yesterday.
Yes, we were. Yeah, it's taking away the monotony is really the name of the game, right? I mean, just frees your mind up to do more complex tasks. And yeah, just like you said, when you have a loop, you're doing something over and over again, and you can just do it with one line to repeat. And doing that in the physical world with robots, I think it's a winner.
We were talking about, is UX going to replace programming and software engineering? And to some degree, some tasks, yes. Machine learning and a lot of those algorithms have taken place a lot of the hard-coded pieces of software development. But in addition to that, it's created new opportunities for different algorithms that we couldn't even conceive of before.
Yeah, it's just made engineering that much more advanced, right? When beforehand you would have to come up with a fairly discrete algorithms, for example, to do facial recognition. Now you feed data through this deep learning network that will learn and will basically come up with the algorithm for you based on the data that you feed it. So the name of the game then becomes, how do you design this network instead of how do you design an algorithm to recognize faces? So it becomes a little bit more meta.
Yeah, and then the cool part of that now is that the software engineering aspect isn't focused on developing the facial recognition, but it's like, okay, what do we do with that facial recognition? What purpose does it serve? What are the other products we can build on that? And it's ongoing creativity. And by the way, I am so excited about these questions. I know I said that before. I'm really stoked at this engineering UX hybrid conversation, and it's something, people always say, what is the one thing you want to do as a UX designer? And aside from building cool stuff, I want to kind of promote this dynamic. There's a lot of UX where you need, if I could say anything about being a day-to-day in the UX designer, someone asked about this and like what I think about is the most important parts of being a UX designer. I think it's understanding the software development cycle, knowing how to code a little bit yourself, and really understanding the technology of what you're building for. Otherwise, it's like, I want to design a house, but I don't want to deal with the math of keeping it standing.
Right. Yeah, which is not going to work. They're
And
definitely interdependent and highly reliant.
And then on the offside, Hamid has to deal with the math of keeping the house standing. But at the same time, it's like, okay, well, what are the form factors? What does it have to look like? What's the thickness of the beams? What are these now tangible things that have to look like once the house is built.
Yeah, and I think developers don't really think that they're actually participating in UX inadvertently, because there are so many decisions that we make and we simply take it for granted. And we don't really think about the impact that it has on UX. So having someone to interface with, very key.
Benjamin Don, how did you know when your UI was easy enough? When were you done iterating and ready to ship? Oh man, I don't think, okay, so there's the design part of this, and then there's like the real practical business part of this. Design-wise, you're never ready to just like let it ship, but you're always at an okay place where you go, okay, it's usable. And it's not so let me dial it back a bit. How I critique and validate a UI is very similar to the QA process. There's a certain spec that you write ahead of time of like design guidelines and laws per se for this product you're building. For example, for our robot, mine was it could never impede on safety. So one design law was while the machine is in motion, whether it's through mapping or running autonomously, there should be no interaction on the UI. There should be no buttons that can be pressed.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing should take away from the person looking ahead or be in the way of the machine while it's moving autonomously. So I think what you have to do is look at the UI element that you're building and see, okay, one, are there any technical flaws? Does it impede? Does it break? Does it impact anything else? What are the, I guess in this case, it would be like how you guys do regression testing.
Mm-hmm.
When you introduce a new thing,
Correct. Yeah.
does it impact anything else in the environment? And UX design is a lot like that. When I say that QA are some of my favorite people, there's a reason for that. That's because whenever you introduced a new UI element, you have to think, does this interaction conflict with another interaction? Does it really solve the problem that you're trying to solve? And what are the impacts software-wise, physical-wise, mechanical-wise, and stuff like that? That's a great question.
Yeah, and I mean, even as a software engineer, there's always that trade-off, right? You always think about, oh, if I could just squeeze in this one more feature into this release, wouldn't that be great? But reality is, at some point, whenever you get it to be good enough for you to be able to tolerate the product in the field, that's kind of when you say, okay, time to release, and everything else will go into the next iteration.
Yeah. Let's see. Like Kelsey asks, are these robots performing on a factory assembly line or more in public roles, like robots filling customer service roles? For us right now,
actually, I think he's saying, given that even information systems need manual input and therefore generate labor costs, how do you think that will factor in when robotics is more integrated into tasks, like you were saying, like robots performing on a factory assembly line? So how do you think that will factor in the labor costs of maintaining robots on a factory assembly line or in more public roles?
It depends on the robot. I mean, the robot industry is so wide, and I hate that we keep saying it depends on this and it depends on that. I think it depends first on the risk of what this robot is satisfying. So for example, if all of automation, let's use the assembly line as an example. In automotive assembly line, if an assembly line is now at the complete responsibility of building all these vehicles, then at that point, the labor costs and everything factored in is a lot more expensive. The risk is a lot higher too. Whereas now what we're doing when you talk about public roles, like filling customer service roles, first let me tackle that. I'm sorry, I'm jumping in between your question. I don't fully think robotics is at a position yet where it could fill customer service roles. There's a human-to-human element. As a human, I need to understand the precedence of why you're asking me a customer service question. There's a perception, there's a need, there's an understanding of your mood, there's an understanding of why you're asking this task, and there's a lot of cognitive load in human-to-human interaction. I see more in this case, it's labor costs and risks tied to human behaviors that are repetitive. So for example, material handling, things that there are certain roles that cause mental stress, that are dangerous physically, that are dangerous due to chemical handling. And that's where I think it ties in more.
Yeah, and I think even to your point as to how much the human-to-human interaction is important, there's been a tremendous amount of effort to try to automate call centers, for example, and we still need human operators at the end of the day. as much as they try to put up barriers before we can actually get to those human operators, there's quite a few use cases where you need someone to talk to and to give them sort of a backstory, which a machine or even an AI system, even chatbots, for example, are not able to handle. So, and what he's talking about, I think, is how much labor would be generated
Kelsey's
as
a
a
woman.
result.
Well,
Oh, I'm sorry,
not
Kelsey.
assuming. We're scrolling through and we're reading
Yes, sorry.
questions
I'm
at the
just
same
going
time.
based off the name.
Kelsey,
I
I'm
know
so
someone
sorry.
who's Kelsey, and he's a man. Anyway.
Yeah, but not
so,
to assume.
Not to assume.
One
Sorry.
way or another, but
Yeah.
I was just looking
What she's
through.
saying, I think I see
What
her
they are
profile.
saying.
What they are saying. Sorry. What they're saying is does it generate labor that and therefore by extension additional jobs
Yeah.
that would be required to maintaining the robots? And I think that when we think about the technical aspect of things, and early on we discussed how resilient human beings are relative to robots, I think there's definitely going to be jobs required to maintain and upkeep fleets. And
And
those
not
are more
just-
complex jobs than
Yeah.
the monotonous tasks.
And not just maintaining jobs, but now programming the robots, now providing QA for the robots, now manufacturing the robots, now designing the robots, now doing interaction or industrial design for these pieces.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry again for, we're scrolling through so fast and we're trying to get through everyone because a lot of these questions are really great. Ryan Taus, the scrubber is kind of unique in that the UX affects not just the janitors, but anyone else around the robot. How does designing the UX differ between these two cases? Very good question. One of my favorites so far. So there's one side of it where when I'm designing for the, when
That's all right.
when we're designing for the janitor, we're looking at it in efficacy, usefulness, usability in the sense of durability, meaning can they use this to do their job every single day and it doesn't break down and it's reliable. And on top of that, being able to address the work concerns tied directly to their job. Now, designing for the environment and people around the janitor, the janitor is in a way the gatekeeper to the robot. In that sense, because they are the kind of representative of the robot in the environment, we have to look at, okay, how do we minimize the time of the janitor now where they don't have to explain to everybody what this machine is doing, why it's there. So then it comes on us to kind of look at the form factor, the mechanical behavior of the machine, working with the business on proper or more effective operating times that doesn't impede on customer interaction. Safety wise, to say someone that is a small child that doesn't understand all the mechanics and things that they should be expecting first, and that ties into the safety aspect. If there's a small animal around, if there's a small human around, all of those tie in, and it's very, very different and related. And a lot of the times it's not just the customers, but it's other workers now that don't work directly with the machine, but they see it in their environment. So those are just...
Yeah, and from the software side, obviously it adds to the complexity. We need to be able to design an interface that janitors can use, but at the same time, we need to have a machine that is friendly enough that people are not intimidated by it, and it can operate in an environment safely.
Kelsey, you have a... Well, let's jump into Child Achilles. Providing familiar UX to janitorial staff is discussed, but the scrubber is seen in public space. What do you think about providing familiar experience to general public around the robot? So, this actually ties into what Hamid said earlier in the webinar, where he said prior to this, he's actually never seen a floor scrubber.
Yeah.
He thinks...
I know I've seen one, I'm sure, but I've never really seen it. I never really even thought about what it is or what it did, and yet it's this big industry, and it's such a surprise to me, when I first joined this company, that it's something that I just completely ignored, and it was just such an everyday kind of thing that it never really registered.
Yeah, and you try to be cognizant of these things when you're designing, and it's really impossible to cover every edge case, but and I'm choosing this point just because of a lot of people that I spoke to say they've never seen a floor scrubber before. They know that there's some you push and there's some that you sit on, and it was, for this, we kind of chose to say, okay, let's go with it. Let's have it be autonomous and really launch it in public spaces and see what the reception is before we decide how to work the UX in for the public spaces to kind of adopt and understand this. And on a surprising level, people were just okay with it. And I don't know if because due to Roomba having a legacy part in the market share and having that heavy burden of the introduction and adoption, that we were able to just kind of say, hey, look, here's an autonomous vehicle. What do you think? Well, I never asked, what do you think? I would just stand back in a corner and observe with notes like Jane Goodall. But it was one of those things where you deploy in small, limited areas and you document the reactions. And it's something that happens over time and in different demographics. And people have different reactions to it. And for the most part, I think the most prominent reactions we got were people taking pictures and videos.
Yeah.
But aside from that, people just kind of ignored it.
Yeah, it's been mostly positive. We've done testing in and around airports, and even at the factory floor, the factory workers would always stop by. I was recently visiting one of our factories and one of our OEM partners, and they would stop by and they would say, hey, can I take a picture of this thing that we're going to be building? I think there's genuine interest in seeing a robot and seeing the advancement of technology and how it's going to make our lives easier.
Kelsey asks, do you factor in any errors or troubleshooting that may arise given that customers may not have a strong UX or engineering background? Absolutely. So in our case, when the machine has an error or goes into an assist mode, it parks itself and it awaits the janitor's assistance. And there's emergency lights that kind of flash or pulse that shows it's doing something and it's requiring attention. So the first thing was bridging the communication between the janitor and the autonomous robot that could be anywhere.
Mm-hmm. And it also sends you a text message.
Yeah.
To let you know, hey, I need some help. And just the whole discussion and the amount of effort that went into making that as understandable and relatable to someone, as you say, without a strong UX or engineering background was epic. We really spent quite a bit of time on it, and I think we got a lot of return on that investment.
And then here's where the design of the UI was very important. So on the UI on the machine, this is the one case where if someone was walking by and they go, what the hell, why is this thing just parked here? The display then would either give an activity state. So it would say cleaning in progress, it will say cleaning paused, it will say assist needed, and then why it needs an assist.
Yeah.
Okay, Naga Monster. This is the one I was looking for earlier. What's an example of the day in the life of a UXer in robotics?
That's all you, Di.
Gosh, this is such a cool question. So for me here at Brain, a day in the life. So an average day, I come in and depending on the teams I'm working on 6 different teams right now. So the communication channel changes day to day and it's regimented in who I work with that day based on what's due. So I work with the engineering teams. I often work directly with the hardware engineers and the software engineers. There's very few times where I'm only working with a product person and another designer. I work with a visual designer as well, but I would say the dominant time of my conversations surround software engineering and hardware engineering and the conversations going in between. I will tackle things that the software engineers are working on, whether UI-wise or new development-wise, provide feedback, schedule testing, schedule observation, and there's a lot of talking that happens in the day, and then there's a lot of prototyping and a lot of whiteboarding, and there's a lot of running between buildings, and then there's a lot of time spent on or with the hardware that we're developing on at the same time. That's the one thing in the beginning I wasn't as involved in, and as after the first 6 months it just became very apparent that all of the conversations needed to have both those pieces together at one time. So I spent a lot of time kind of bouncing in between, looking at stuff on the machine itself and then going back to software. I also spent a bit of time doing development or looking at the UI or helping with development on the UI. It's helpful. So for example, if Hamid's working on a UI item and he checks it in and he creates a pull request, tells me what feature branch he's working on. It's helpful for me to be able to pull that branch, run the UI, see the behavior, and do an initial UX QA on it before it gets put on the robot. Then we'll put it on the robot, do a session together, and then it goes to QA. But it's really, really different. Every day is different. It's a lot of fun. I mean, some days my days are just like this. And I'm just like, I don't know what I'm doing.
I think we all have those days.
Why won't? I mean, I was telling Hamid I have a deep respect for software development because there's so many times I go, I can't get my build to run. Why won't it run? And it's the same thing with design problems.
Well, and hardware too. It can be frustrating.
The highs are super high,
Yeah.
and then the lows are just like, why can't I get through this? And then all of a sudden an answer comes in. That's a great question. Thanks for
I
asking
think
that.
Nagamonster also had a follow-up question. Also, what are your tools for communicating your documentation? The usual tools or more 3D?
So sometimes 3D. We have a 3D designer here who does incredible industrial design, and I'll work with them on building either a model of something or doing things in 3D manner. But most of the time I've communicated everything from Post-it notes to whiteboarding to PowerPoints to Keynote, Sketch, Envision, Zeppelin. I love Zeppelin, by the way. Photoshopping things together, cardboard prototypes.
Those are great. Yeah.
We cardboard prototyped a machine with like foam glue tape and everything like that.
Yeah.
It depends on the task at hand, and I will pick the most effective thing. I'm not always looking for accurate, high fidelity. For me, I reserve high fidelity.
There's a second poster.
For those that joined the webinar, you'll know the significance of that picture frame now.
That's great.
I reserve high fidelity UI prototypes and actual prototypes for user testing. Because to me, user testing, it requires, unless it looks real, you won't get real feedback. But internally with everybody else, just whatever's quickest and can get the point across.
All right, next one. Ryan Taus. How does the size and possible safety concerns of a large robot affect the design of the UX compared to something that cannot cause the same level of safety concerns?
Boom! That is an awesome question. We were talking about this. I'll let you tackle the first one.
Yeah, well, for a bigger safety robot, we obviously need to have multiple layers of software, safety critical layers, as well as a high level. Definitely more sensors and a lot more auditing, and so that slows down development, and things are a lot more deliberate. Whereas with a smaller robot, you're more concerned with damage to the robot itself, and the investment.
Damage to the environment because it can get into more spaces. This is perfect, just even based on things that we're working on internally, looking at future development. When you're designing for a larger robot, remember when I was saying in the webinar that there are certain design rules, laws, that you set in place right at the beginning. So for example, safety is one of those things that I'm very big on not compromising on. So every decision, UX, UI wise, for the legacy and duration of the project, I always look back and go, okay, does any of this conflict with the safety rules and safety laws? Am I being very rigid in that manner? Yes, I always will be. And then that's when product people come in and we go, okay, well, what is really the safety risk here? But you kind of look at what is the worst case that could happen in both forms. And then you design around that. And really, we do have, when we do risk assessment and looking at other machines too, and we're doing field observations and research, we really do look at, okay, what is the worst thing that can happen? What's the percentage risk around that? What's the probability? And do calculative measures around software, around environment suggestions of operation times, and all of that to factor in those safety concerns.
He also says, design of everyday things is great. Yes.
Yes.
Totally agree, Ryan.
Yes,
Totally
absolutely.
Agree.
And then last question, what do you, from Robot Singularity, what a great name. What do you feel is the most important way to work with engineers as a UX designer? This, by far, is the most important question, and every designer is going to answer it differently. To me, so when I say this, it's not for everybody, but to me, in the way that I've found success, and honestly, I work closest with engineers. I probably work with engineers more than I do designers. How I find it to be very important in speaking and creating a dialogue with engineers is the same way I feel about travel and culture, in the sense where you extend an olive branch first to understand that role and what they're trying to do and walk a minute in that person's shoes. So for me, when I look at engineering, a lot of times these talks and seminars, it's all about teaching engineers about UX and everything. When at a core, when I present a workflow diagram, when I present a wireframe or a prototype or everything, engineers are great at QAing it. They see where the interaction flaws are. They see where the flows break and it doesn't make sense, and they're great at writing error cases. But it's like on the same side, I think as a designer, you need to be able to have a technical conversation with an engineer. And it's not just talking about the aesthetics of things, it's talking about the functionality of things. And again, like technical feasibility. I think the biggest olive branch I was able to extend was we were finally getting to the fun part and also painful part is when you're polishing a UI or you're selecting a hardware button and you're nailing the final details. And I would watch sometimes designers pixel pushing with an engineer. It's like, can you go 2 pixels up? Can you try 84829C instead? Oh, can you do F instead of F7? And instead, me being able to pull a build, open it up, tweak it myself to the final thing, it then kind of created this dynamic engagement where we both could work together collaboratively. And in the same time, like I'll send a design file or an interaction prototype to an engineer, and then he'll be able to then have that conversation like, okay, if you put a shadow here, is it done via rendering? Are we doing it programmatically? Is this something that we need an asset for? And it just, it's a long conversation, but I think it needs to be a joint relationship conversation.
Yeah, engineers, we are a weird bunch, it's probably why we're engineers working with machines and not people, but I think it's so valuable to have that relationship with UX, and I know I keep bringing up the same point over and over again, but I think that it's so critical. The success of a product depends so much on its adoption in the marketplace. If you write code and no one ever sees it, you might as well not have written it. I mean, it's so important, it's so vital to have people be able to use your software and to have an expert on hand who understands how people will react and who is able to guide you, to success together. I think is a great thing to have.
And I think mutual respect is huge. When you travel to a foreign country, being able to just say hello and how are you in a different language immediately drops barriers on how you interact with someone. And I think as an engineer, when I come in and I go, hey, so what language is the UI written in? What language is our backend written in? What are the technical limitations I should know about? What are the risks in changing this piece of a UX behavior that could then impact, just starting with those dialogues, then in turn gets the engineer thinking in a UX manner, going, okay, well, if I write this string this way and this error message this way, does anyone actually understand it? Mm-hmm. And I think as UX designers, it is a lot of our job to do UX design, but not in a silo. I think it's our job to kind of help and make everyone else a UX designer too and design a great product. And that is that. This Q&A was so good. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Hamid.
Yes, thank you, Dai.
You're like my favorite person to do this with.
And you the same. Thanks for having me.
We will jump on again. Bye, guys.
Bye.